Okay, thank you so much, and morning to everyone. Let me just put up my screen quickly. And my face. There's, there you go. Let's see. Uh, okay. So hopefully, you can see the PowerPoint, and towards the end, we'll take some questions and answers. And so, yes, I'm the M&E manager, but I'm also for NACCW the Deputy Information Officer with regards to this POPIA. And you'll probably be wondering what that means, but I'll cover the different roles and what it means with POPIA, and how NACCW is doing things to be POPIA compliant. So what is POPIA? Okay. And also, if you do have questions while we're doing this webinar, you can just put them in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. Okay. So what is POPIA? So POPIA stands for, and it was already set out earlier now, the Protection of Personal Information Act, and it's South Africa's privacy law. So some people call it POPIA, some people call it POPI Act, and who it applies to is all South African citizens, okay, because it's a law in our country, and it regulates the processing of personal information to lawfully respect everyone's right to privacy. So I know it's a bit all these words, and we'll go over what it means to process information. We'll go over what processing personal information is. But basically, it has to do with protecting the people's rights to privacy. Okay. It applies also to all organizations as well as the people. So it applies to NACCW, child and youth care centers, government departments. It applies to different companies. And it's already a law with regulations that's been in place since 2021. It's fairly new, that it's been put out in place. So before then, you wouldn't have heard POPIA, the word POPIA, so much. So now it's in effect, and we have to be sure that we are compliant and that we also understand our rights as people, for our own privacy and information. So the POPIA has established it's got an information regulator, which is a national body or unit that functions to make sure that organizations are POPIA compliant. So you can think of them almost like a council or a board, like a body of sorts, that makes sure that things are according to plan and that people are being compliant. Okay. Um, Now, I'm going to, towards the end, go over the data privacy policy that we've established, but I just want to go over some of the key terms of what the POPIA covers. So what is personal information? Because remember, I said earlier, it has to do with the processing of personal information. So personal information is any information relating to person, an identified or an identifier, they call it natural living person. But it's basically, information about you and me, a person. And they call it in the POPIA, they call it a data subject. Um, or it's information to do with a juristic person, which is a legal entity. In other words, an organization. So it's information about a person or an organization like the NACCW. All right. And it's any data that is personally identifiable, that can identify you as a person or organization. So just take a second and think, okay, what personal information is there of yourself? Now, an easy one is just a name and a surname. And if you think about a form, a lot of the things that you fill in a form is your personal information. But there's just not only your name and surname, there's a lots of other different personal information out there. And here's a list of some of them. Now, there can be more, but we said the name, there's your address, your telephone number is another example of personal information, your email address, your tax code, um, your tax number, your bank details, your passwords, your driving license, your ID number, your location, your IP address for your internet, your mobile phone number, or your investment information, your date of birth, your health service history. So information about you. Okay. Now there's other things. There could be what else is not on this list. Um, your social media profile link, your LinkedIn profile. I can't think of anything else. What else is there? If there's anything else you can think of, you can put it in the chat. Um, Even your biometric information, your fingerprint. That's another example. So whatever can identify you, all right, is personal information. And the POPIA protects your right to privacy with this kind of information. Now, there's also special personal information, okay? And it sits in a different category in POPIA. And this information is like your race or ethnic group, your political opinions, your religious beliefs, your trade union membership, your genetic data, your biometric data, your health data, your data concerning your sex life, your sexual orientation. Okay, this is information that they call special. All right. So you'll often find that forms that you have to complete, whether it's for insurance or a survey or whatever, often asks you about this personal information, but they don't often ask you about special personal information unless they have a specific purpose to do so. Um, like if you're filling a form for a doctor, they'll obviously ask you health information, but you're not going to write your health data necessarily for the bank or something. Okay. Now, what we said earlier is POPIA has to do with processing personal information. And what processing means is basically any operation or a couple of a set of operations on your personal information. So it's performed on your personal information or data or sets of personal information. Okay. Whether it's automatically done or manually. So whether it's entered into a computer, your information, whether it's on a register, and there's lots of different ways to process information. You can collect information, you can record information, you can organize it, structure it, store it, change it, you can delete it. I mean, those are all the different examples here to do with how you can process information. Now, think of examples of how your information or the information of your beneficiaries, if it's an organization, has been processed. Okay. Here are some examples. An example of processing is you register people at a front desk or reception. You come into work, you put in your sign in, you put in your name and your surname. You're completing paper forms for your beneficiaries in a family file, an enrollment form, a service form, a process note. That's all examples of processing. You capture when you record your beneficiary details on an electronic system, on Excel or some other system, when you capture their data. Employee payroll is also an example of a processing information. And recording CCTV, taking a video of yourself, of others. And there's so many other examples of processing information. And what the POPIA deals with is all of those different types. Okay. Now, the processing of information is not just on paper. This last example here is linked with videos. And so besides paper, there are ways where you are having your information audio recorded. So your image, your face, I mean, that is one of the most tangible and clear examples of your personal information. Audio recordings that you can hear, video, pictures, and social media. All right. So think of personal information as this big house full of anything that can identify you. Now, let's look at what POPIA covers. Now, POPIA is there to protect your personal information. I think there is an echo. Okay, no, it's gone. Here are the 7 principles that privacy principles in POPIA. So the first one is that your information, personal information, has to be fairly and lawfully obtained. So you can't force someone to, give me your details, fairly, lawfully. Don't want to trick anyone into giving information. The second one is to use it for specific purpose that it was originally obtained. All right. So, and this you have to be careful with, because remember, you do a lot of different forms, and it's important also to read the fine print, because sometimes you think you're sharing your information for one thing, but the fine print says that this person, this company or whatever that you're filling in the form, can share it with a third party, and you end up with spam calls, and you end up with all sorts of calls where your information is now shared more broadly, and you didn't know it, but it's actually what is said on the particular form that you signed or completed. But anyway, it's supposed to be for the specific purpose that you are originally giving your information for. All right. Adequate, relevant, and not excessive. So it's not fair to ask someone to complete a 100-page enrollment form. Even a 20-page is quite extreme, but obviously depending on the purpose. That it's accurate and up to date as much as possible. Accessible to the subject. And remember, the subject is the person whose information it's about. So if I submit my information to whoever, to NACCW, to a child and youth care center, to the bank, I have a right to access that information. It's not secret away from me. Okay. The POPIA also says that it has to be kept secure. So if your information needs to be stored confidentially, it's not supposed to be shared with whoever without authorization. And then the last one, which sometimes people forget, is that it also has to be destroyed after its purpose is completed. All right. It doesn't mean that once you fill in something or your information is shared, that record has to live on for 20, 30 years. Also, depending on the situation, if it can go into archives, but you don't have to keep a particular form for many, many, many years. All right. So those are the 7 principles. And here are the rights of data subjects. So think of these as rights of you as a person, because remember, POPIA applies to all of us, but also think of this as the rights of your children that are in the child and youth care centers that are in your organization. So think of it in 2 ways: when you are processing somebody else's information and when your information is being processed. So you have the right to be notified when the personal information is being collected or accessed by an unauthorized person. So if something goes wrong, like a hacking, or maybe your family file was lost, and you don't know where the family file is, or it could have been stolen or something, you have the right to know about it. So if it happens in your organization, the beneficiary has a right to know about it. The second right is that establish whether a responsible party, and the responsible party is, for example, the organization, so NACCW, has to establish, holds that personal information of that data subject, and to request access to his or her own personal information. So you have the right to access the information back to of what you've submitted. So if you submitted information to NACCW as a member, you have the right to access. Let me see what my information that you have of me. Okay. A child has the right to access the information in their file or from the organization. Okay. The third right is to request, when necessary, the correction, destruction, or deletion of your information. Okay, so if there's something incorrect, your date of birth, or there's something that's not right, you have the right to correct it, and when necessary, to delete it or destroy it. Now, when necessary is important because there is information sometimes that you can't just delete or destroy because it's linked to, let's say, a reporting of an abuse case where personal information cannot just be destroyed. It's in a case, it's in the courts, and it's not just something that can just be destroyed. And this links to the next one. You can object on reasonable grounds um, to the processing of his or her personal information. You can reject it, you can object to it. But the reasonable grounds is important because let's say you don't want your organization to have your phone number or your name, surname, things like that. It will be difficult to do your payroll, for example, without your details or your bank details, etc. So it's under reasonable grounds that you can object to it. But if you get a spam call and you get somebody phoning from some telemarketing, you can say, look, as per POPIA, I have the right to object to you having my information. Please delete it. Okay. And then they can delete it. The next one is to object to the processing of your personal information at any time for the purposes of direct marketing. Okay. If you don't want your information marketed, you can object to it. And that the other party has to uphold by that request. And the thing is with these rights, sometimes we don't know about them and we think that, okay, our information is now completed there and done. There's nothing we can do to retract it, but that's not the case. Okay, you have rights to object to it, to request a change, and to ask a specific organization to stop calling you, for example. So we covered some of this already, but we said the data subject is the person whose information is about. Okay, so at organizations, it can be employees, it can be beneficiaries, it can be funders, staff, so any person whose information it's about is called a data subject. The responsible party is like your organization, who's deciding how and why to collect information. Then there's something called the operator. So if your organization outsources processing information on the behalf of the organization, then they are called the operator. So let's say, for example, you get your information captured by another organization. They're a third party. They would be an operator. So you're outsourcing the processing for some reason. Maybe marketing is not done at your organization. It's done by somebody you're paying to do the marketing. Then that would be an operator. So the information officer is a very important person. And it's one of the organization's employees who's appointed to encourage POPIA compliance. So remember when I introduced myself earlier, I was the Deputy Information Officer for NACCW. NACCW also has an information officer. Okay, and that's the key person to deal with your POPIA compliance. In our case, it's the HR manager who's supported by the deputy, right? So if you don't have an information officer in your organization or you don't know who you are, in order to be POPIA compliant, you'll need to appoint that person. And lastly, the information regulator is like I said, the body that monitors and enforces compliance for organizations in South Africa, okay, like a board or a council, but for POPI. So we spoke a little bit about this already, but they've put it here in what they call conditions of the lawful processing of personal information, right? And it ties into earlier on, but I'm going to go to it in a bit more detail. I'm just check. I've got time. I started. Yeah. So the first one is that the POPIA, it states that you as an organization must be accountable to the POPIA Act, all right? So it's your responsibility to comply. So it, we can't just sort of ignore the POPI Act or just hope we're in accordance. You have to actually put in the necessary documents and processes in place to be compliant. Otherwise, one can get in trouble. You have to have a good reason for collecting and processing personal information of people. All right. This is called processing limitation. It's not there must be a specific reason you're collecting an enrollment form of a beneficiary or a service form. It's not that we introduce 10 different forms and there isn't some kind of reason to it. Now, usually you wouldn't introduce a form without a reason, but knowing and articulating that reason is important in each organization. Purpose specification, we spoke a little bit. So the people whose information you're collecting must know why you're collecting and processing information, and they must consent to it. This is very, very important. So again, you're not collecting information in the sly or that the person doesn't know you're collecting information. They must know that you're collecting information about them and they must consent to it. All right. So beneficiaries, caregivers giving consent to their children's information being collected, you as a person giving consent, signing yes, and signing on particular forms. And we'll give, there is an example of a consent form a bit later that we'll look at. The next one is further processing limitation. What this means is that if information is used more than once, it must be used for the same reasons it was communicated to the person. So if you said, okay, I'm collecting your information because us as an organization, we need to um, monitor your case. We need to monitor the situation. So we need to know your personal information. We need to report it to DSD. It's according to the Children's Act. We need to have your case monitored and a comprehensive file kept. Now that is the purpose. So you can't then process the information for something else like marketing without the person's consent. All right. The next one is information quality. To the best of the organization's ability, you have to collect and process it accurately and completely. So, verifying data, data cleaning the information, checking the data once in a while to see is there mistakes in there, is there things missing that I can better fix. You must process the information in a way that those whose information it is knows what's happening. So this is openness, again, transparency. Um, trans they have the right to privacy, and people have the right to know what is happening with their information. The next one is security safeguards. So you must ensure, as an organization, that information is stored in a safe and secure way, that it's in a filing cabinet, that it's locked, that if it's confidential information where it has the HIV status of people or children or the abuse that happened, that is very sensitive information that has to be kept in a secure room, in a secure cabinet, locked. Only certain people have access to it. They can be registered to sign in and out who's accessing the information. It shouldn't be that anyone can access it like who an employee that has nothing to do with the case, and just like a volunteer just walks in. You must be careful if they have access to that kind of information. And then the last one is data subject participation. This one is the one that's, I would say, least often done, is that you must notify, communicate to those information whose information it is, about their processing the information, and you must provide them an opportunity to correct or update their information. So oftentimes we collect a form and then that's it, we're finished. Or we collect something every month, but we don't give the opportunity for the people whose information it's about to correct or update it. So, that's where it comes in, where you can show the person their file, their service form, and say, look, this is what I'm submitting for you. Is this information correct? Do you want to add on to it? You want to change anything? Obviously, with reasonable grounds, but this participation element is also important so that they have the rights to correct or update information and to see their information. Personal information processing, special personal information. Remember earlier, it was race, it was religious affiliations, with all that, health, all of that is prohibited except under certain exceptions. All right. And in a lot of child care organizations, it's mostly exempt because, for example, the prohibition of the information does not apply to, for example, medical professionals, like if they're collecting health or sex life information, social services, or health care institutions, if that processing is necessary for the treatment of the person or the administration of service of interventions. So if the purpose is to help them with their health or to help them with their well-being, and you need to collect that kind of information, then only can you so collect, right? So that is the exemption. And also for children, information is prohibited, but there also is exemptions that apply. And again, for us, it typically applies because it's carried out with prior consent of a competent person. That's why it's very important that consent is had from the caregiver. That's why they're saying competent person, someone of age like the caregiver, uh, or the child if they're of age. And if it's a little child, like a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, you can ask for their assent. It's not necessarily consent, but you can ask them for their assent to include them, to say, okay, I'm collecting information. This is what the informations are for. And so the consent can have a part A, consent, where the caregiver signs or the youth, and part B for the child's assent. But for POPIA, they only require the consent of a competent person. The next exemption is that it's necessary for compliance with law. So you have to process information of children if, for example, you're completing the Form 22, you've identified that or suspect there's abuse going on. In that case, you are mandated by law to report and to collect that required information and to share it. All right. Can't keep it then to yourself, because you as a child and youth care worker or social worker or whoever, you're obligated to report it. The third one is for processing is allowed if it's for historical, statistical, or research purposes as well. All right. Obviously, with the ethical processes in place for that last point. So the POPIA, there are two key documents for your organization to have in place. The first one is the NSS well, put NSSW because that's ours, but a data privacy policy needs to be put in place, and the PIA manual. The PIA manual has been there since early 2000 or 2000. The PIA manual is the promotion of access to information. The two complement each other, but the data privacy policy deals with more privacy, rights to privacy, and the PIA manual deals more with requests and accessing of information. Right? But in any case, those two documents have to be done for your organization. And the POPI Act states that you have to have those two documents available on your website. Right? That's an interesting thing, but they're trying to keep transparency. So you have to have those two documents in place, and on your website. And these are the foundations of you being compliant. Then in our case, what we've done is the data privacy policy doesn't have to be a very long, tedious document. It can be a simple, succinct document. I'll just show you ours quickly. And it's also available for sharing in this platform as well. Because if you need, sometimes, if you need an example, it's useful to refer to one if you don't have something in place or you want to check the one that you have already. This data privacy policy, what we have is it comes with a lot of other, what we have is annexures or supporting documents, rather than putting it all in the policy. And we have 12 supporting documents or annexures, which the POPIA Act asks you to be sure you have protocols on. We have a data inventory, which is just basically what information does your organization collect. Here we split it per department. So we've got information that the M&E and program department collects on children, on child and youth care workers, on mentors, HR, employee information, finance, whether it's funder or different information there as well for employees. Training department has information on learners that they've trained. So an inventory is just a list of information that you're collecting. And it's useful so you know at a glance what information you're collecting and whether that information is needed or not. We have a consent form for data sharing, especially if a third party asks for someone's information, we have the consent form for that. We have an addendum to employment contracts, so that whenever an employee comes in, it's very clear about what their rights are in terms of privacy when they're sharing the information to the organization as the employer. We have a consent form example to get people's consent, whether it's the caregiver or the youth. We have a little disclaimer on personal information, and this usually comes on emails because remember, your email is also an example of personal information. So you're sharing your email all over the show whenever you send an email. So there's a little disclaimer that goes with the email that's also important about your personal information. Number 6 is a data retention or destruction protocol, and it deals with destroying information. So even before you want to say, okay, these are the files from 30 years ago, it's out of date, shall we just destroy it? Just double check who owns the information. If it's an organization and you have your protocol, then you refer to your protocol on the destroying and destruction process. But if you have that information and it's reported to a funder or a department, it's important to double check with that funder if they have protocols for you to keep that information. I know that, for example, USAID, when they were funding, but they put on organizations that they were funding that they had to keep the paper forms for 5 years, 5 or 7 years, one of those. Then only can the organization destroy the forms. 7 is social media policy. It's important to have a social media policy as an organization so that information is not just shared without referring to the protocol. And it's also important, I know that sometimes it can be well-meaning to take photos of children, to take videos of children and share it. But remember, children have the right to privacy and right to not have their information marketed unless they consent to it. So unless you have that the caregiver has consented to the marketing on a consent form, actually not allowed to share their image. So what we often do is we use images where you can't see the children's face, or we blur their faces. And so it's just important that is covered in your policy. And whenever we want to use a face of a child, that child, we've gotten the consent and assent to use the child's image. And it's important to protect yourselves as an organization when it comes to that. Cyber security policy, because our IT manager holds that particular document. It's a bit beyond some of my understanding as well, but basically it's anything to do with passwords, protecting information that we capture on our shared drives, um, even on our emails, in Excel that we store in the company server, organization server. Number 9 is email usage policy, using emails professionally. Um, and we have a policy on that. We also have an internet usage policy that also links to privacy. To privacy. Remote work equipment policy, especially because you store a lot of personal information on laptops, and it's important we have a protocol around that, especially when it has to do even with electronic copies of children's information on the laptops. And lastly is a data breach. So what happens if something happens and you have to report the incident to the regulator? Let's say, for example, a box of family files gets stolen. I don't know who would want to steal, but it happens, these things. If it gets stolen and the information is then leaked or you don't know where it is, you have to have particular processes in place. Apart from informing the beneficiary, you now have to also report it to the regulator as an incident, and then take the necessary acts. If a worker, for example, refuses to give back the family file, or refuses to give all the forms that they are meant to, and they're keeping it at home, and maybe they got dismissed and they're using the forms as some kind of leverage, again, that incident can be reported to the regulator because it's now infringing on the rights of the beneficiary. Okay, so there are different steps to take, and it's important that there's a policy on that. I just want to, because I know I've been talking for very long, and people might want to have questions. I want to just quickly go over, let me see. I want to quickly go over just our data policy so you can see the data privacy policy. This is probably the most important document that the organization can have, because it puts everything what I said in the slides in the form of a policy. And this is our policy that we developed early on. Hope you can, am I still sharing? Yes. So the policy has different sections. It's a 20-odd page policy, has the purpose of it, definitions. You can see everything I just said in the slides is in this policy. We've got what the policy's purpose, who it applies to. It has definitions when we're speaking about different things. If we go down the scope, who it applies to, this policy applies to employees, contractors, people whose information we collect.
Sorry,
This
Nicia?
policy.
Nicia,
Yes?
you didn't reflect it here, the policy on the screen. We only see your face.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah.
goodness. Oh, sorry. Yeah. There we go. See, I think it's sharing now.
Yes, thanks, eh?
Yeah. Sorry about that. So we've got the data privacy policy. It's about a 20-page document. And it deals with the purpose of the document. Let me just scroll down. It says who the organization information officer is, what their role is, information. In our case, we also have a team dealing with so that it's not only held by one person. Usually we have 3 to 4 people dealing with, let's say, if a breach does happen, the team of 3 or 4 people. The rights of the data subjects, so it's what we said in the slides is here. The data privacy principles. If there's accountability now, instead of just copying everything into the privacy policy, they can just refer to the Section 8 in POPI Act. So POPI, you can print the POPI Act and read the POPI Act. We've already done that, so that's why this is here in sections. But you can read the actual act and see that you comply. And this deals with personal information, the processing, how we process special information relating to children, how the examples of the information we collect, storage and retention, our approach to it, secure processing. So all of this is in the policy so that it's clear, it's transparent. Direct marketing has to have prior consent, so this is in the policy. And then right at the end, there's also references, the actual act, and there's different resources on the internet to deal with this. Yeah. Now, what we've done and what we suggest for organizations, if they haven't done already, is almost like an action plan to tick off things to make it POPIA compliant. We did this at first, it was a bit daunting when we, to making sure that we're compliant with having to do a lot of things linked to the POPI Act. There's 20 items here that we've had to tick off. So as an organization, if you hear from an organization, the first one is to appoint your officer, your information officer. Okay, here's the activity that needs to be done and the output so that you can tick off done. Okay, the next to appoint your deputy information officer. The next is to appoint your party, the NACCW as a responsible party. And here the POPI Act requires you to complete a form. And here's the website that you're having to do, because you have to register as an entity. POPIA framework, once you've done all these documents, make sure you have a framework. A framework is basically something like this, okay, of all the different documents you've got. The information inventories, it's this number 1 here. So you can see we haven't just made up 1 to 12, the reason we have these documents in place is because we're aiming to be POPIA compliant. If your information or children's information crosses borders, POPI Act requires you to have a protocol around that. Number 7 is a section in the inventory of what special information you collect. So if you collect race, if you collect health information, you need to just have a list showing what you do collect. A little assessment that you can do. It doesn't have to be very intense. It just needs to be a little assessment about the information you process and how you process it. The privacy policy developed, which is the one I just went to, making sure that you have it and that it's in place. Keeping information accurate and up to date, a protocol on that, a protocol on retention, a protocol on destruction. We've put this in one document. Emails, forms, all of that, that's where the annexures come in. This request, data subject request form, that's where we have it in an annexure. PIA manual, that's number 15. An incident report, what happens if something happens, that's in our data breach policy. Here's a whole bunch of different processes. This is in the cybersecurity. Summary of personal information. This is in the PIA document. Here's the PIA manual on website, data privacy policy on website. They want PIA manual lodged with regulator. And you find If you go onto the website of the regulator, you've got the different processes there. And the last one that was on our checklist is the staff to be trained. So once all the documents have been done and you've got your documents, is to train your staff. And then moving forward, any new staff that they are in their orientation to the organization are aware of the POPIA compliance that we have as an organization. And that's it in a nutshell. I know we went through quite a lot, but I think it's useful just to know our own rights as a person for POPI Act. I'm sure there's lots of times where you've got spam calls and you don't know where your information wound up, or you complete forms. I don't know if you complete forms and they're asking information. Remember, with POPI Act, it gives you more power, more agency to be able to change data, to refuse data to be collected on reasonable grounds. So the POPI Act is there to protect privacy, and more importantly for the children who we serve, because they're under 18 years old. It's even more so important that their forms and information is handled with the most care. Okay, so that's it. And I'll hand it back over for any questions, and I'll try to answer them to the best I can. Otherwise, I'll just pull in our info officer if needed.
Thank you, Nicia. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
We must go there to more, and then you can just clap or react, I think. There's it. Let me also clap for you. It was a mouthful that she have shared with us. So we're going to allow people to ask questions for clarity, and any comments, whatever you need, you must we open it up for discussion. Nicia is here if there's certain things that you would like to know, because it's very technical as well. We'll start there. Donald, want to open the gate? Yes, Donald.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairperson. Mine, it's not a question. I want to say thank you very much to Nicia for this comprehensive presentation. It does sound daunting as you go through it, and for organizations that may not have started this journey to develop their own policies, they might find it challenging. But I think that workshops like this are helpful to get organizations to understand what it's required and what should be done. And I also want to indicate that please, participants or people who have joined, do ask questions, even if it's legal questions. We've got Lynn, our legal and HR manager, amongst us, who is going to respond to questions that could be legal, or even advise you on what you can do. And your questions may be based on either the beneficiaries you are working with, the children you are working with, or I'm sure that we will be able to accommodate questions that concerns you as adults or social service practitioners, child and youth care workers, social workers. And we know that amongst us here, we have invited administrators, directors, and members of boards. So please feel free to ask those questions. We will try and respond to you as much as we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donald. Nicia, you say that we cannot just take pictures of children, but they love to be in photos. Maybe you could just share a little bit again, especially the girls like to pose and have their pictures taken. What is it that we should handle it?
Yeah, so pictures especially can be well-meaning for organizations to put on their Facebook page or other pages, but if the child hasn't given consent to sharing their information, it's always best to be on the safe side and not share the beneficiary's personal information, especially because it's part of marketing processes. If the child themselves shares their own picture, that's their own doing, but it's more about the organization, like NACCW, for instance, putting in front of a report picture or in a report pictures of children, or in presentations. Um, we are careful to not put the child's face unless that we have consent, and if we have consent, then we'll put their face. But then we'll keep the consent form aside, and we know, okay, we've got consent to share image here for these children. For these children, we don't have consent, so we can't share their information. So the important part is the consent. If yeah.
Thank you, Nicia. I see this comment here in the chat box. Unfortunately, within a small organization with the social workers, we have to run from case to case and no assistant staff to actually get this whole presentation up to compliance. Who is able to assist?
Mm.
It's
It's a good question because, oops.
No, you can continue. We will
Yeah.
deal with the next question afterwards.
Okay. No, I'm just saying it's a good question because to do the POPIA, when we started doing all our documents, it took us time. It took me quite a while to put it together. It wasn't a quick one-day process, because some of the things can be quite complicated, your IT processes, your email, all of that. So if you are, a small organization, it might take a bit of time to get it up and running, maybe the director, team, but it is important to have it, even if it is small. So, we're sharing our data privacy possible data privacy, what is it, policy, so that will help as an example, because that can make things a bit quicker. We ourselves, when we were doing our data privacy policy, we referred to the one that one of our funders was using, and it made the process a bit quicker. But yes, it would need some person or people in the organization to take pieces. You do this one, I do this one, so that it comes together.
There's another question here that Wanna ask, what happens when your information is hacked and used illegally, especially by foreigners? Asking on behalf of NACCW Youth Forum Free State.
Say that again, if the information is where?
If the information is hacked and used
Oh,
illegally.
hacked.
Hacked, yeah.
Oh, goodness. And maybe Lynn might have an extra point on it, but if it's hacked, as far as I'm aware, that information requires to be reported to the person whose information it's hacked on. So if my information is hacked, then NACCW will need to tell me, look, your information has been hacked. This is the repercussions, and then it needs to be reported to the regulator, and the regulator will then proceed it as a case.
Yeah. I see Lynn that respond there in the chat box. I don't know if Lynn, if you would like to say anything more. Other. Welcome,
Hi,
welcome,
Mr.
Lynn.
Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate what Nicia said, and that is if there has been any breach or anybody has gained access to your information, that needs to be reported to the information regulator. What we need to understand is that this, however, is not a criminal matter, it will be a civil matter. So once the information regulator has done its investigation and they find that there has been negligence, they will then take civil steps against the person who has caused that breach. But yeah, I haven't yet seen any matters go to court on this, but then it is a fairly new bit of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. See, most people are here talking in the chat box. You can also raise your hand and share your question. We'd like to see your face and talking to us as we listen. There's another question here that says, how do we prevent foreign volunteers from sharing children's information abroad?
So especially with students and coming into organizations and volunteering, so they have to be informed that the organization's data privacy policy does not allow for that. So if the name and surname of the children, you can't share the information back unless you give us a false name or a pseudonym. So, if they can share, for example, stories, but it has to all be anonymous. Then they can do that. There's a way to get around that. But you'll have to inform those volunteers that this is the policy and they can share only certain things or only this thing or that thing. And if they want to share images, you have to say it's not allowed. And you can have the volunteer sign some kind of a contract or something stating that they won't be able to share this information for the protection of the child.
Okay. Thank you, Nicia. If you have follow-up questions, you may post it also. I'm just going down. I see there's a question. At some organizations, you may not have a laptop or resources, and you use your personal laptop to help to get through workload. How do you regulate? It comes from Carmen from Cape Town.
Sure, that's a very good question, and I wish I had the IT person here to go through our cyber security or equipment policy. But the first thing is linked to password. I know that with all our personal laptop, we have a password protected, and that could be a step that you could do to regulate, so that the only person that has access to information is through a password. And then if your documents is in a folder, you can also protect certain folders. Certain Excel documents, for example, can only be opened with a password. So you can take those extra precautions on doing that with different passwords. But with the different, if you're at home, and your laptop is left open, there's also things that you want us to take to secure extra, that your equipment is not just anyone can see certain things. Yeah, but I'll also look at our equipment policy and see if we can share some of those sections with you on that part.
Okay.
And I see there's a lot of comments about we can have the PowerPoint available to the people.
Yeah. Are there, Donald, I don't know if I've missed any other questions or comments. If you could, that you pick up some. Are there people that would like to ask other questions? You may raise your hands, please. Or any comments?
Yeah, I don't see any other question that has not been responded to here. I see this one is this presentation please available to us to study and customize to our organization. What we are also, you will soon see and the NACCW membership form pasted on the chat. We will be very happy to share and support organizations and members, but it's important for us that we support people who are members of the NACCW. So if you are not a member, please complete the form and join so that we are able to support you when you need to. Thank you. And Randy has just pasted the application, the membership form. So please do, if you would like to get some support. Thank you.
Membership is 50 Rand for individuals, and I think it's 100 for organizations. Is that correct or not?
Yes, that is correct. And that
Yeah.
is 50 Rand for individuals and 100 Rand for organizations for a year.
Yeah. Okay. There's a name here, Kutzanei. Kutzanei. Yeah, you may speak. Please pose your question. You must unmute.
While Kudzanai is trying to connect, I want to acknowledge members of the NACCW Youth Forum who have joined this session as well. Some of them are tertiary graduates. And so we appreciate that they made time to join this session. Thank you very much.
It seems like Kudzanei is having challenges there with these technical challenges. There's Rosemary. You may pose your question, Rosemary.
Yeah, it's good that now she came to use my PC because she's struggling to unmute.
Okay, good afternoon. So this question is directed to Donald. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So last year I had a challenge. It's cancer related. I made a payment to practice for I made a payment, my yearly payment. Then I got my certificate end of the year. So when I sent an email requesting for my number, for my new number, since now I have my certificate, they said I have to pay again.
Okay. Now, thank you very much for that question. Can I request that you write to cancel again and then or forward me their response using this email address that I am putting on the chat box here.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just
thank you.
I already emailed, so I'll just send you I'll just CC you the conversation that we had with them.
Okay, thank you.
Next.
Thank you. You may mute, Rosemary. I see there's Patience here. You want to ask a question?
No, I just joined a little bit late, so I missed out a lot.
Yeah. Okay. But you must just switch your camera off because it interferes with how we do the things. Yeah. Thanks. I don't see any other questions. Unati, you may pose your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Can those other people mute, please? Sorry, Unati. Yes. You may continue.
Okay. Afternoon, everyone. Chair, I did send in a question on the chat box because I had a background noise at the time, but I think I should just say it here now because the background noise it's a bit low now. I wanted to check in terms of recording a meeting or recording the proceedings of the meeting. What does the POPIA Act say, or the POPIA Act say regarding to that? Is a person allowed to record the meeting? Are they allowed to maybe record it using WhatsApp or just their phones? That's the question I wanted to get clarity on. Thank you.
Thank you, Nati. Nicia?
Yes. So with when registering for the webinar, then we take that as consent for the recording. Will be what we can do is after before the webinar, we can just make sure that everyone knows it is being recorded, because we put the webinar up onto YouTube. And it might be that some don't know, but when registering and coming in here, it's almost like you giving consent, in a sense. But we can certainly make it more obvious that right in the beginning it's being recorded.
Thank you. Unati, you've got a follow-up, or is you clear?
Yes, yes. No, I was not asking regarding the webinar. I was just asking regarding a meeting, just a meeting, an ordinary meeting
Oh,
in an institution or
yeah.
in an organization.
I'll double check on that because, it depends, because I'm sure I heard that you can record it, if you're an employee. And I'm sure I heard somewhere that you can record it without necessarily getting consent. But let me double check with that, Onati, and come back to you because I'm not 100% sure.
I see Lynn wants to respond there. Let's give her a
Yeah.
chance. And then we'll come to you,
Thank
Donald.
you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, I actually do want to respond to that. And just from a legal perspective, you're not allowed to make any recording of any nature unless you have the person's consent. So, if you're in a meeting and you are recording it, you can't have your cell phone under the table and record it. It cannot be used because they did not have anyone's consent. So make sure that when you make any recordings of any nature that you obtain consent first, or else it will be disregarded and seen as an illegal recording. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the clarity, Lynn. Donald?
Yes, thank you. I have got two questions here, but it's more to assist with clarity as Nicia was going through the presentation. And the first one is the issue around the appointment of information officers or deputy information officers. And so am I correct, Nicia, that in disappointing people, you are referring to appointing people who are already working in the organization? So we're not saying you need to appoint people as an additional staff. It's giving
Yes, correct.
a responsibility to a particular person. Okay.
Yes, correct. So somebody already in the organization, preferably somebody in a senior position, who's got capacity, and you appoint them as the information officer. So they might have two roles. They might be like your HR manager and your information officer, or your program manager and your information officer.
Okay, thank you. And the second one is, how often should staff be trained? Do you just do one training and that's it, or is there a requirement for regular training? It could be annually or biannually. Do we have any guidance on that?
I'll double check on that because what we've done is we've done a comprehensive once-off training, and then for new people coming in, we do also a once-off training. And I'll double check if there's a requirement for refresher trainings. There might be an annual requirement, but I will double check.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I've just been informed that the members can also join the NACCW WhatsApp group so that they get access to information as and when it is posted or it is made available. And the link has just been posted by Randy on the chat box. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Donald, for sharing that information. And we don't see any other questions here in the chat box. I think it was a lot of information, very technical, very legal information, and I think people must bite it by small bits and also go through the presentation again. Maybe we could come back in the future to do a follow-up in this regard. At this point then, if I also don't see any other hands, we will then call on Carmen Espling to then do the vote of thanks for us. Carmen, you may switch on your camera and unmute. You are muted again.
Am I unmuted? There we
Unmuted,
go.
yes. You can show your face also if you would like to. We give you consent.
I'm trying to. I'm trying to.
Oh, you must click on the camera, but if not possible, it's fine.
Yeah, I have tried. It doesn't want to. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming out. And this is much valuable information, especially from the NACCW and everybody that came to join and take out some time. We would really want to thank your organization. And yes, as I said, the POPIA Act is one of the things that is up and coming, and it's always feasible to know where we put our foot into it. So just thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carmen, for doing the vote of thanks for us. Before we close, I'm going to ask our Deputy Director to share if there's any announcements, maybe talking about our next webinar. Donald, is Zeni with us? Or is Donald, you going to do it?
Yes, Zen is with us, but I can do it.
Okay.
And if there is anything Zeni can add. The next webinar, it's going to be around this time of the week, next month. We will communicate the information. And please, when you receive the information about these webinars and other information that we are sharing, share it wider with the child and youth care workers in our sector, because the main reason we are having these webinars is to educate the sector. And we have posted 2 links. The one, it's the membership form of the NACCW. We encourage organizations and individual members to join, so that we are able to provide support where you require that support. And then the other one, it's a link for the WhatsApp group. We also encourage you to join the WhatsApp group so that you are able to get information directly as and when it is made available. So that's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you to our guest speaker, Nici and Lynn, for being present and to respond to the questions of our delegates here that attended our webinar. Thank you to our Deputy Director as well, Donald, for being here, as well as Zeni. I see Zeni's want to make also an announcement before we move out. Zeni, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to remind everybody that May is around the corner. I know we're talking about April, but May is Child and Youth Care Workers Week. And we haven't heard from CYCnet about the theme yet, but we will be communicating that. And obviously, Randy will get our logos and our preparation done. Just reminding people about that. But in the month of May, we will have, as one of our activities, a presentation that has been confirmed by CYCnet. Martin from CYCnet will come and demonstrate to us how to access CYCnet and use the information that is broadly available. So that would be the May webinar. And as Donald said, we will announce the April webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Zini. And at that note, we want to then say thank you. May you have a good day and enjoy your work activities and tasks. Thank you. This webinar is then closed.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, and goodbye. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Reverend. Isi, you still want to ask a question before we close? People are leaving now.
Yeah, it's probably waving goodbye.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.